Hi, this is Andre. I want to talk about interface modes on the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Stephen Clements for commissioning this one. Interface modes are a really interesting and also really strange subject on the EDP for a few reasons. The first is that depending on the interface mode you have selected, they can do very different types of things to the EDP. Most of the interface modes will affect feedback and or input level and or output level. Some of them will affect more than one. Some of them will affect feedback during different states of loop operation. Some of them will combine feedback and input and output in a bunch of different ways. So they're very cool, but they're also a little hard to talk about as a generalization because different interface modes do different things. The second reason it's a little challenging to talk about interface modes is because half of the interface modes only exist if there is something plugged in to the feedback pedal jack. What? So let's check that out. If you come down to the bottom parameter row under the record column, then by default you have loop, delay, expert, and stutter. These are your four primary interface modes. We've talked a little bit about stutter mode because it's one of my favorites. That's kind of my default setting for loop, delay. Loop, delay, and expert we're going to talk about a little bit in this video and a little bit in subsequent videos. Now, these are the four interface modes you have by default. The reason I say by default is because if you plug a volume pedal into the feedback jack in the back panel, now that I've plugged that in, you can see that there are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different interface modes. So 4 of those 8 interface modes are only active and only available if you have a volume pedal plugged into the feedback jack. That's because those interface modes in particular make use of an expression pedal, in this case a volume pedal, to do certain things. If that's not quite complicated enough, just wait, because there's another wrinkle in this saga. The 4 interface modes that are always available without a volume pedal being plugged into the feedback jack, that is loop, delay, expert, and stutter, those are available if there is no pedal plugged into the feedback jack. But if there is a pedal plugged into the feedback jack, those 4 interface modes take on added functionality that is not there if you don't have a pedal plugged into the feedback jack. So, it's kind of a complicated subject, shall we say. So I'm going to cover interface modes in a few different videos. The first one here is going to talk about the loop interface mode. This is the default setting. This is how the Echoplex comes out of the box. I'm also going to wager that this is how the vast majority of Echoplex users use the EDP. So if I record an initial loop, overdub something here, now we have this pedal plugged into the feedback jack, and what you'll see is that if I bring this down, then you can see I'm bringing feedback down. This is basically controlling feedback in the same way that MIDI control would regulate it in previous videos we've talked about, or the front panel feedback jack, which is right there. So if you do have a pedal plugged into the feedback jack, the rear panel analog feedback jack, then that pedal starts controlling feedback for you. And you can do some of the swells and soft replace type things we've talked about in previous videos. You can bring it down to 0 feedback. You can bring it back up to 100% when you want to. Basically all the normal types of things that you would associate with feedback. If you have the pedal plugged in to the feedback jack, then the front panel feedback knob is disabled. It doesn't do anything. I'm turning it back and forth. There's no change happening here. Now if I unplug the pedal from the back, now the front feedback knob does stuff. And if I plug it back in, come on, make me look like I know what I'm doing. Come on. Thank you. Now, the front panel knob doesn't do anything, and feedback control has been reassigned to the analog pedal. Is there a difference between using an analog pedal to control feedback as opposed to using a MIDI pedal, the way that I've demonstrated in previous videos? The answer is a conclusive I don't really know. I'm not an expert when it comes to using continuous control of feedback, this kind of thing. I really consider myself a bit of a dilettante when it comes to this sort of thing, compared to guys like Matthias Grobe or Andy Butler, or people like that, who really make extensive, truly virtuosic use of feedback. I've heard mixed things. Some people have said that the resolution is a little finer if you use an analog pedal rather than MIDI control. Some people say that there are differences in terms of how it feels, how it responds, how it scales, how smooth the transition can be. So I can't pretend to know what I'm talking about when it comes to that sort of thing, but I know that there are people who would say that there is a slight difference in terms of the details of how feedback responds if you're using the analog pedal input, like I am right now, as opposed to using MIDI control. Having said that, these are pretty subtle distinctions. It's not the sort of thing that most of us are really going to notice or deal with, I don't believe. This is stuff that becomes more of an issue if you're really into feedback and really use it in a very in-depth, very subtle way. And I don't. I still consider myself a bit of a dilettante when it comes to feedback, so I can't speak meaningfully about that. Some people prefer having an analog control. Some people prefer using MIDI control. Your mileage may vary. As far as the type of pedal to use, my understanding is that it needs to be a volume pedal and that it should be a passive volume pedal. I thought that maybe an expression pedal would work. I went out, I got an expression pedal, I plugged it in, and it didn't work right. I only got about half the values. So I went back and exchanged it for this. This is a passive mono volume pedal. This is an Ernie Ball VP Junior pedal. And I will have some information at the end of this video as far as details about what types of audio taper pots are recommended, what types of values, that sort of thing. I am noticing that it doesn't start kicking in with control until I'm quite a ways back. Can I show you close up on the camera? I'm probably going to embarrass myself here, but let me try anyway. So here it is all the way back, heel back, toe up. And you can see as I start bringing it forward, now there I've already reached 127, but there's a lot of extra room here, as you can see. If I bring it back the other way, it's not kicking in until now. So there's a lot of, I guess you could call, dead space. I don't know how much of that has to do with this particular Ernie Ball volume pedal. I don't know how much of it has to do with the nature of using volume pedals to control feedback. Last night I was playing around with this a little bit. I plugged my guitar into the volume pedal to use it as an actual volume pedal, and I did not notice that you had to scale it way back before the volume started getting reduced. In other words, as soon as I started making a very light change with the volume pedal, I could hear a pretty substantial change in the guitar signal. So you don't have to wait this far back to get an audible change when using it as a volume pedal. And again, I don't feel comfortable talking about this just because I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to this sort of thing. I don't know if different types of volume pedals are going to have different amounts of dead space. I don't know if different potentiometer values are going to make huge differences one way or the other. I basically don't know very much about this stuff, so I don't want to BS on camera any more than I really have to. I will say that for some of the things I was trying out with this, the limited range actually was a bit of an advantage for some of the more esoteric, obscure, unusual interface modes. Being able to cover a wider range with a smaller amount of movement like this actually was helpful for certain types of techniques, and we're going to touch on those in subsequent videos. In any event, most people, I would say probably at least 90 to 95% of everybody who uses an EDP just uses it in loop mode. Loop under the loop delay parameter, then the loop delay parameter settings are known as interface modes. I guess I would describe interface modes as kind of like the equivalent of going from playing a guitar with a pick to playing a guitar with fingers, or playing a guitar with metal finger picks, or playing a guitar with long right-hand nails the way you would as a classical player, or using hybrid picking. And some of them I would say are more analogous to changing the tuning on your guitar. Basically, I would say that different interface modes set up different relationships with accessing functions in the EDP. Which to me is really interesting because I'm a great believer in the idea of looking at different relationships in terms of how you access your instrument, whether that instrument is an Echoplex Digital Pro or an electric guitar or an acoustic piano or a piece of software. The interface to me is a really important, really significant thing. So the idea of interface modes I like a lot, simply because they will, in some cases subtly, in some cases dramatically, change the way that we basically deal with the EDP and change the way that we regulate input volume, output volume, feedback, and or combinations of those things. So we're going to talk about those in some subsequent videos. In the meantime, this has been an introduction to the rather mysterious and mercurial world of interface modes in the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Stephen Clements again for commissioning this one, and thank you for tuning in. It's kind of a strange subject, but I'm going to do my best to guide us through safely and securely. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.